The next speaker is actually me. I've introduced myself already, so I'll forgo doing it again. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now. And someone might just indicate to me that you can actually see it.
Just need to switch it to presentation mode.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry. Yeah, I do. Slideshow from current slide. Yeah, sorry about that. Despite all the rehearsals, got it wrong. The IEM in context, and when I say in context, we've already had some context. This, I suppose, is the context of implementation through QQI. So we've heard about the history of it. We've heard about the current policy context, and we've heard about the legislative program. And I suppose what we've been trying to do in QQI is consider it in terms of a unified process and having an underpinning concept to allow us to do that. And when we've reviewed the legislation and looked at it, and there's obviously been a lot of thought and discussion around it. One of the things that's struck us is that the new legislation is very much part of a long-standing process of embedding the principle of learner-centred education in the Irish tertiary education and training system. And again, if we look back historically, we can see that concept has been embedded and enshrined in a body of legislation dating back 25 years. Now, I suppose something that we're all very, very conscious of these days is change. And while we've had this constant commitment to learner-centred education, the conditions in which it has to find expression, of course, these have been changing constantly, and in some senses in an accelerating way, particularly noticeable over the last number of years. For those of us who've been knocking around a bit, I mean, the last 10 years has been a bit of a whirlwind, from financial crisis through COVID, and now a war on the European continent. So all of these changes, they do have impacts, and in a sense, when we're looking at the concept of learner-centred education, we do need to reaffirm that and give it continuous attention within the new situations in which we find ourselves. And in a sense, I think the Qualifications and Quality Assurance Education and Training Amendment Act is a key part of this infrastructure of renewal. And the way we conceive of it here, and hopefully this is something that all our stakeholders will be able to hold on to and share with us, it's essentially what we're doing through the 2019 Act is putting in place a suite of measures that share a determined but very practical concern to protect the interests of learners engaged with the Irish education and training system. So every aspect of the legislation is underpinned by that concept. Sometimes we lose sight of this, so it is worth restating it, and it is an absolutely essential context for us putting in place the roadmap to the international education mark. So the measures themselves, they span qualifications matters, they span quality assurance matters, and they span regulatory matters. They also span interests that relate to the general welfare of learners, the quality and consistency of their learning experiences, and the recognition of their learning achievements. And what that means in practice, when we get down to it, we have a series of projects in QQI, all of which relate to implementing key sections of the legislation, underpinned by that unified approach to learner protection. So if you look at the diagram here on the screen, I've put the international education mark for English language education right at the center. But depending on perspectives, you could put any of these measures in the center. But all of them are interlocked in different ways. Some so complex that we may not be able to touch on them all today. But essentially, we have things, for example, like the inclusion of awards in the NFQ. This is there so that there's transparency about qualifications, but also when we come further on, particularly in higher education, to sort of link the international education mark to the student visa regime, we will ultimately hope that we will be replacing the existing regime with the IEM, and we will need to have those qualifications clearly in the Irish Register of Qualifications. So that's why that inclusion piece is there, just for anyone who's not entirely sure why. As I said, we have another important concept too, like academic integrity, and Pádraig mentioned that different parts of QQI are working on these, and what we're then trying to do is bring them all together and ensure that they are a coherent whole. But the main business of today, and I want to focus on that now, relates to the central hexagon and the two to the bottom left, and these are the three areas that will affect English language education providers. So we've heard them mentioned already, the due diligence assessment of private providers. Well, that applies to English language education providers. It also relates and will involve higher education private providers and FET providers. There's also the Protection of Enrolled Learners scheme, particularly the Learner Protection Fund. Again, that's affecting or will involve the participation of a sizable body of providers across private higher education, further education, and then the English language education providers. And then the international education mark there in the center, which in this specific context is a particular mark related to English language education and will have its own code of practice. Now, my colleagues, Mary Sheridan and Mary Grennan, will speak a little bit more in detail about the three pillars. I'm just going to give some general remarks about them, just to I think they're worth setting out at the beginning. The first thing is that QQI's role. Well, we have a responsibility in law for implementing the provisions set out in the 2019 Act. The Act gives QQI certain new statutory functions or strengthens some existing responsibilities. And I think, again, it's very important to say that the organisation is absolutely determined to work in partnership with all stakeholders in implementing these functions. And we do so not, out of any sort of bland, determination to do so, but really based on the idea that we have all of us a shared commitment to learner-centred education and the protection of learners' interests. And we feel very strongly that the interests of learners can only be served by QQI, not by QQI on its own, but absolutely in collaboration with learners themselves, providers of education and training, government departments and their agencies. But also, I think this is very important to say, all those of goodwill who want to help learners realise their potential and contribute to Irish society and its economy to the provision of safe learning opportunities and positive learning experiences for all that come into contact with the Irish education and training system. So in that spirit, then, this is why we have these three pillars and why ELE providers will be engaging with us on them. So we have the due diligence process. Providers in this area will need to meet certain criteria concerning governance, finance, and compliance with the law. And these measures will be put in place to assure QQI of the provider's capacity and capability to implement quality assurance procedures, again, for the benefit of learners, and to provide coherent programs, again, for the benefit of learners. The international education mark is the second pillar. And again, this will, as Tanya and Pádraig alluded to, will establish a national quality assurance system for ELE provision in a context where it's linked to a statutory code of practice. So in a sense, it brings the sector in a more formal way into a relationship with the broader education and training system in the state. We envisage that this mark will take an approach to the student experience appropriate to ELE, and my colleague Mary Grennan will speak about this in a while. It'll be guided by current international and national best practice. Ultimately, though, why we're doing this, we want to be able to provide assurance that all ELE learners studying with providers who have been authorised to use the mark will receive a quality experience. And that is the absolute bedrock of this. The Learner Protection Fund, and again, my colleague Mary Sheridan will speak in more detail about this along with the due diligence area. What we're doing here is actually protecting the interests of learners. So the concept of the protection of enrolled learner, or PEL for short, it's intended to ensure that learners will be able to complete their programs, which is, a basic requirement of protecting learner interests. And this is in contexts where their chosen provider ceases to trade or ceases to provide a program. And what the PEL scheme and the Learner Protection Fund will facilitate is program completion, ideally, or a refund of fees through the administration of a Learner Protection Fund under the stewardship of QQI in circumstances where that's not possible. So they're the key elements. So before Mary and Mariella go into the detail of the different areas, I'd just like to give you a quick overview of the milestones and the indicative timelines that we hope to meet in moving forward with the implementation of the international education mark. It is a complex process. And to avoid complicating it any further, we decided that we'd start today as ground zero, even though there has been a lot of preparatory work going on over the past while in preparation. But I suppose we're more going public today, and at the outset, it's very, very important to emphasize that what we're doing today is opening stakeholder engagement on due diligence, the IEM and Learner Protection Fund, and that this webinar is a key part of opening that engagement with the sector today. So that's a Q1 2022 milestone. And I should add that engagement now is open, and it begins from today, and it will continue hereafter. The next piece we have to do, and Mary will go into more detail about this, is and Tanya alluded to the Mary. There will be ministerial regulations around the due diligence process, and they're currently being road tested with a panel of experts that QQI has assembled, and that work has started and it will continue over the next while. In Q2 2022, from April, we'll have a number of pieces of parallel work going on. There will be an initial road test of the due diligence regulations with select providers. We will have to do it on a select provider basis, as it will be impractical but we will do it in a way that covers off the diversity of the different types of providers that will be subject to the due diligence process. Growing out of that, then we will be publishing various guides and material to help providers prepare for the due diligence process in the form of handbooks or frequently asked questions. Then here, the next milestone, again, these are all in Q2 2022. It concerns the Learner Protection Fund, and in particular, we will have to have an engagement with you in the sector, and we will need to call upon you and to gather some data to underpin the planning and development of the Learner Protection Fund, and Mary will talk about that data gathering exercise later on. Moving towards the end of Q2 2022, as we come into the early summer, there are some technical pieces that need to be achieved, like the agreeing a sequence of commencements of the different sections of the Act. That they have to be in place before any of the formal implementation can start. Mary Grennan's unit, the International Education Unit, will be working on the agreeing and developing a QA approach for English language education and the preparation of the first draft of the English language education code of practice. Again, following that, then we'll be moving into completing a draft IEM policy, the International Education Mark policy, and the International Education Mark authorization process. That brings us then into the end of Q3 and moving into Q4, end of the summer and into the autumn. There are again various pieces that need to be put in place to enable the implementation of both the IEM and the Pell and Learner Protection Fund. Governance arrangements, obviously there have to be strong governance arrangements in place, and we will be working on how, for example, recommendations coming forward from assessment panels for compliance with the code of practice, how they are internally governed within QQI, because we have a series of committees that run the mark over all of the processes to ensure that they've been operated appropriately and that the decisions are sound, and we will keep our stakeholders up to date on our discussions on that, and then the final decisions. We will need to agree we will need to agree transition arrangements for the Pell, the Protection of Enrolled Learners system, and then also draft regulations for the Protection of Enrolled Learners system and the Learner Protection Framework. And we will be doing a number of these processes in collaboration with our colleagues in the FERRIS. In October, we would, and work has commenced on this, we would hope to launch the IEM branding at QQI's 10th anniversary conference, which is a big milestone for our organisation in a different way. But we would very much hope that the IEM progress on that will be stitched into that important event for the organisation. And at the same time, we'll be launching the formal public consultation on the ELE Code of Practice and the associated IEM policy and authorization process. And I should say that prior to the formal consultation, we will engage with stakeholders on the thinking that's emerging, and indeed some elements of the drafting ahead of the formal publication of the code and the IEM policy and authorization process. So we hope there won't be any huge surprises. That's certainly our plan. In the final, these are all in the final quarter of this year, and we would also at that point put in place an IEM operational plan. Another area again that will no doubt be of interest is the fee and charges structure, and we'll talk more about that later on. But that process, the agreement and the approval and prescription of these fees and charges, some of which rest with QQI and some of the minister, will be sort of established in the final quarter of the year. So all going well, and it is a challenging sequence of processes to put in place, and what we would hope to be able to open the due diligence process in Q4 2022, and in the same period to operationalize the Learner Protection Fund. Again, we would need to do that in collaboration with the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, and Public Expenditure and Reform. And that then brings us to the final element, where we would plan to open the IEM application process in the first quarter of 2023 and implement the Learner Protection Fund. Now, there's a lot in that to take it in, so we will sort of expand on this now and hopefully be able to address some of the questions, no doubt, that are forming in your mind as you're hearing this. It is a challenging work program, but we're up for the challenge and looking forward to engaging with you on bringing about, with all of those good things in mind, ensuring that we have a duly recognised, quality assured ELE system, protecting learners and enhancing the attractiveness of English language education for international learners. So that's me done, and I now will come out of that, I hope. I think I'm out now. Yes.